welcome to the party. Welcome to Simply Cyber Firesides. I am your host, Dr. Gerald Auger, and over the next hour, we are going to be joined with a regular on the show, one Brandon Poole, founder, principal, consultant, DFIR, and ransomware expert, leading the charge over at Panoptcy Security. Now, Brandon was recently on the program a couple weeks ago, maybe 3-4 weeks ago, with a hot, spicy talk where he was saying you're doing vulnerability management all wrong. Now, little did we know that was supposed to be the royal you, the proverbial you. And as we got into the show, it turned into the me you. And to the point where I actually just went off stage because Brandon was walking around doing his TED talk. And if you've been a regular on the Daily Cyber Threat Brief, you know that the EPSS scoring has gotten integrated into our regular workflows. And that's compliments of one Brandon Poole. Now, today we are flipping the script, focusing on that blue side of action, the digital forensics and incident response facets of our industry. Now, super, super important. And we've all got the little graphics of identify, quarantine, eradicate, right? Documentation, perhaps if you're feeling spicy and you want to do a little GRC work. But Brandon's about to crush your sacred cows and explain to you that you're doing digital forensics and incident response all wrong. So get your notebooks, get your pencils out, and get ready to learn from a true professional in our industry. And he's a great friend of mine as well. One Brandon Poole, get ready. And as always, Simply Cyber community members, be engaged, ask questions. We're here, Brandon and I, to serve you and make your experience better. We're trying to level everybody up. Hashtag Team SC. Shout out to all y'all. B-Dubs, Fleetus, Swims with Sharks. We got Carrie, Chris Whitlock, FedEx. We're going to get a great show for you. Let's go get one Brandon Poole. Hello, Brandon. How are you, dude?
Hey, pretty good. And just to be clear, Jerry, I wasn't trying to, hate on you. I just needed someone to take on the persona of, Carl, and that just happened to be.
Oh, that's brutal. That is brutal. I'm CyberSec Carl now. Yikes. Let's see. I guess that's better than Baby Gap. That was floating around a little while ago that because of my shirt size, I shop at Baby Gap. So, Brandon, it's been a few weeks. How are things going in your world?
Well, things slow down over the holidays for me. Now they're picking back up. So, had a nice holiday break. I hope everyone else had a nice holiday break. Got a big stocking full of coal because, I'm this evil security guy, ruining, tipping, killing sacred cows. So,
I get it. So let's talk digital forensics. I got a million questions and I want to zero right in. Let me ask you this. In the world of digital forensics, when you get called in for a gig, is it like, how on cybersecurity, maybe you get if I got called in to do an information security program assessment or build out, I could do that. But if someone called me in, they're like, oh, we've got all this source code and we want to do development side application security, I could do it, but that wouldn't be my forte. On the digital forensics side, how does the work get split up? And is there different dimensions of work that you would do, wouldn't do? Kind of unpack it, because I feel personally like a lot of people believe that it's just like malware in your environment called digital forensics incident response. Like it's a one size fits all. Can you kind of talk about the work itself and dig into the details?
So first thing I'm going to say that I don't think is controversial, but maybe the people outside might consider it controversial, is like digital forensic incident response. Like I lump into the same bucket as SOC work. So to break it down, like digital forensic incident response at its core is, something happened that could be, malware, ransomware. It could be insider threat. It could be HR has a question about what someone's doing. Like, did they go and download sensitive company documents, or did they take a look at the payroll data? You just have something that's a potential either policy violation. It could be an actual malware incident, malicious actor, you name it. It could even be something accidental. What you're trying to do is you're trying to gather enough evidence and tell that story and answer questions where someone else can operate and make a decision with confidence. That being said, like really and truly, like when it comes to the SOC world, it's the same thing. The difference is like every SOC is different. People put different things on there, but as a SOC analyst, you're doing the same thing. You're trying to use your data sources and your tools are a little different than traditional digital forensic IR. But at the end of the day, all you're trying to do is piece together, tell that story. So I mean, I guess to get back to like the root of your question, really anything in that realm of being able to like take a piece of data that is, secondary or tertiary, extract some kind of value to kind of piece together that story, I would say is kind of like in the wheelhouse of incident response digital forensics.
So in the world of like SOC analysts or for smaller businesses where you're kind of doing everything, one of the first things you start on, and it kind of gets old quick, is like dealing with phishing, right? So person falls for phish and you work through it, what happened, or a legitimate email gets caught by the phish and you have to go in and release it and stuff like that. That gets really repetitive and kind of boring after, even just a couple weeks on the job, right? In the world of incident response or digital forensics, is it all exciting and sexy all the time, or is there work that's repetitive? Is it all repetitive? Can you kind of talk about some of the pieces that are like,
Yeah. So like, a lot of people hate on like the phishing stuff that you just talked about and like the SOC. Digital forensic incident response, especially if you're in like the, whether it's internal or external. A lot of my experience, I've done both, but I've got probably equal experience both being an internal DFIR person versus an external, like a consultant at this point in time in my career. But like even being an external consultant, like it gets very repetitive. Like to this date, most of the time you get called, it's ransomware.
Yep.
There's only like a handful of very prevalent like ransomware strains. A lot of times, like the TTPs do shift over time, but a lot of times it's the same TTP, same toolings. These criminal enterprises, their whole thing is to make as much money as quick as possible. So like when you look, especially at like some of these sophisticated actors, like they have like an amazing SOP. Like, so it's just like boom, 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 boom. They'll just, a lot of it's automated, even the human operated like ransomware, a lot of stuff's automated. It's following an SOP. They have a script. So like you can see the same thing 4 different customers all within like 1 week. So it does get very repetitive there. Probably the only place I guess it gets a little interesting is, some customers have like better logs, some customers have different tools. So, what you have visibility into and how confident you can paint that picture, does vary, but a lot of times it is the same stuff. A lot of times it's the same conversations, same lack of controls that fail. I would say it is still very repetitive. And just like you can get like SOC people that become very jaded, there's a lot of digital forensic incident response people that once again become very jaded from, just seeing like the worst of the worst over and over and over again.
So when they get jaded, I mean, are they like irritated by the end users, the businesses, for just their negligence of basic fundamental cyber hygiene?
So it can be that. It could just be like, it's some of that, but I think probably the bigger thing is like it's so easy to come in and see the same thing, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 times. And just to be like very nonchalant about like this gets more into soft skills. Be very nonchalant about like the customer, the client, the individuals, the organizations, like situation. Like, it's no big deal. You got hit with a ransomware. Happens 100 to them. Like that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Paying that ransom, stuff like that, is real easy to kind of like brush things off or tell you don't want to like doom and gloom and worry them to death. Like you got to kind of ride that like fine line. And so that's why like a lot of, bigger firms, especially that are doing like digital forensic correctly, they are very aware that it's easy to get burned out. It's easy to get jaded and kind of like lose sight of that. So like they actually do limit how many like actual hours you can work doing incident response or digital forensic within a certain period of time. Things like that. And they'll pull them off and they'll have them do like sales, pre-sales stuff, or take like initial calls, things like that, just so they don't become that way and burn out.
Yeah, my neighbor is a firefighter. He's been a firefighter the whole time. I've known him for years, and he always says, like, he'll chastise newer firefighters if they go to a fire and the fire's under control and they're just kind of hanging around and like joking. They're like joking with each other or whatever. But the homeowner's right over there, and he'll yell at him and be like, "Dude, like, this is that person's worst day of their life. Like, I know this is Tuesday to you, and we did a fire yesterday. We did a fire the day before. This is that person's worst day. So, be mindful of that. Have empathy." So it sounds very similar. It's just like a virtual fire. Your business is on fire, right? So it's kind of nuts. But you mentioned SOPs and, standard operating procedures for threat actors to execute on. Does that mean there's opportunity for digital forensics incident responders to have SOPs? Because if you're seeing the same thing 30, 40, 50, 100 times in a row, I mean, isn't the process the same? Can you automate? Can you get economies of scale?
100%. And I would put a big fat asterisk beside it, and it depends, right? So I think probably the best way I can kind of describe it is like, let's take a look and let's look at, medicine. Doctors are big on like checklists going into surgery. Do I have this? These checklists are designed to make sure you have all the equipment, you're prepared for any situation that might arise during a particular like surgery. Or, same thing really is true in like if anyone out here drives like airplanes, anything like that. I've got a buddy who's got his own private plane, and he's been talking about, because he got his pilot license, stuff like that. But there's like this huge checklist you go through to make sure that, you're prepared for all these emergencies that could happen when you're flying, right? That's a great checklist to prepare you from any situation, but it doesn't necessarily account for all situations, right? There's a lot of nuance in there, and you've got to know when the checklist doesn't work and when to deviate from that. Digital forensic incident response software is kind of the same way. You can have an SOP. You can kind of have a plan. You can definitely automate certain things, but you have to know when to like take your foot off the gas and when to pivot. So I know I've talked about this before. That's the difference between a run book and a playbook, right? In SOC world. So like a run book is, that terminology comes from manufacturing. You are at a station on a pretty much like a conveyor belt, and on that station you have so many responsibilities, and what that run book is any scenario possible in that run book. Like, you can flip to it and it tells you exactly what to do. Like, you don't have to think. Like, you could take someone the first day, put in front of them, give them that run book. They might be a little slower, but they could officially work that station, right? Playbook comes from sports. You got a playbook, a bunch of plays. Just like football, you might have a play, you get to the line, you see the situation, read the defense, you might call an audible. So 100%, you can automate some of this stuff. So like, you can use like scripts, your EDR agents, whether you're using like CrowdStrike. I know you guys have talked to like the Lima Charlie crowd before. Deploy that, get your visibility. A lot of those EDR agents give you the ability to kind of like run scripts or other binary packages. You can automate a lot of that stuff for collections, things like that. But like, there's certain times like that's just not going to work. You just have to have that awareness or that knowledge when to kind of pivot, or when to, don't fall in love with the SOP and try to document out every situation, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, 100%. So let's start tipping over sacred cows. It's called, you're doing DFIR all wrong. What's something that is just an accepted practice that you're like, why are we here? What are we doing here? What's one of these, like, you're doing it wrong?
Well, I mean, this is one that actually here in the last like 5 years, I think, became a little bit more mainstream. But I know at the time when I got into it, a lot of like your DFIR folks were ex-law enforcement. And the way they operate is, listen, if we're going to tell a story, we got to do full disk image, and we got to image everything. So you would get into a situation, and there'll be ex-FBI. This is not to hate law enforcement. Like, what they're after and their motivations in law enforcement are completely different than private sector DFIR firms. But they'd get in and be like, oh, you got 300 assets hit with ransomware. We need to pull drives out of all 300 of them, and we're going to send them in, and we're going to image them. And it's like, dude, do you know how long it takes to image that kind of stuff? Like,
I'll be back next Tuesday.
but yeah, we'll have this company back up and running in like 3 years. I hope they have 3 years of runway to get through this. But like, that used to be, and like there's still certain providers out there and certain people like that still like work that way. Now, the more modern approach that people do are like triage collections, which actually evolved from something called sniper forensics, which was introduced, probably like 10, 15 years ago now. But the concept of pretty much sniper forensics is like, listen, like if you have a 1 terabyte hard drive, and let's say all 1 terabyte of that is in use, really and truly, there's only a couple 100 megabytes, maybe, probably less than that, of actual artifacts and things that's going to tell you whether or not this is forensically interesting in telling the story or what happened. If all we do is pull those artifacts and look at them, we can determine whether or not we need to take the whole forensic image for, whatever legal, law enforcement, whatever other purpose, if that's even necessary. So like that used to be the biggest thing. Like it was, when I first got into it, that was a little bit controversial, but now, that's pretty much like the standard operating procedure for most cases, because like I said, if someone gets hit with ransomware, you can't do full disk imaging on 300 machines or something like that.
Yeah. Is the way that businesses and victims are interacting with threat actors, are they doing that wrong too? Is that an area of a consternation?
Well, I mean, this is where it gets interesting, and it's not so much like that you are doing digital forensic wrong. It's more that the policies and kind of like external forces has forced us to do things. So like there are some people that try to like go and negotiate with like these ransomware folks directly, and listen, probably not the wisest. Like there are people out there that do ransomware negotiations. That being said, there's a bunch of folks that's popped up like mom and pop negotiating shops and stuff like that. And some of them are good, some of them are a little bit questionable. There are a few like really big firms that actually have a lot of data, and usually those are the firms that are brought in by like insurance companies, because like they're able to say you were hit with this variant of ransomware in the last 60 days, like they haven't negotiated, or we're able to negotiate like a 30% discount. Or in some cases, some of these like ransomware authors now, like if you even try to negotiate, they're just like, no, we're gonna up the price. Like we're not playing that game. So like, they can even tell you whether or not it's even valuable for you to reach out. So I mean, like, that's somewhat questionable. I think the bigger issue right now with like the whole landscape actually is cyber insurance. Unfortunately, cyber insurance is kind of really spun a lot of the stuff out of control and really created a lot of the chaos we actually see here today.
A couple questions in chat coming in, and I do encourage you to ask questions. I mean, Brandon's got a wealth of knowledge, and he's really fun to talk to. Mad Hat wants to know, specific to that, isn't it worth to negotiate if your backups are fried and you got to pay? Like if you're basically stuck in the water.
Yeah, I'm not saying not to negotiate. I don't know. I hate people that say like, don't ever pay ransoms, don't negotiate with terrorists. That's the dumbest thing ever. Like, really and truly, like if you're a business and you've been impacted that much, and like the ransom is $200,000, let's say like you make $6 million in revenue, and if you don't pay this, like your business can go out of business, and like all these people are going to get laid off. Like, yeah, you got no other option. Sure, do it. Definitely not saying like don't negotiate. What I'm advising is don't negotiate yourself. Like try to bring in someone who is like an expert and has done that before, because like sometimes like it's not that you can't do it, but like some of the things you have to do is like proof of life. Like this gets really interesting into like more of the economics behind like cyber crime and self-policing and stuff like that. But like, sometimes folks will go and ransom stuff, but they will use a version of the encryptor that's busted. So like you pay all this money, they give you a decryptor, and like you're not able to decrypt the files, in which case, why'd you pay that money? So like doing like a proof of life, like can you prove like, you can decrypt the files? Sometimes the data, sometimes data is not all that important. A lot of times now they do double extortion. So that's where you actually exfil the data first. In fact, probably one of the more interesting cases I had was where the ransomware group got in, they exfilled the data. When they kicked off the ransomware, the antivirus, out of everything that happened, the antivirus captured the ransomware, knocked it down. So this organization called me, or called the firm I was working with on like a Friday, be like, yeah, we got hit with ransomware. We wanted to bring in an expert. It's a Friday. AV caught it, one thing, blocked it, not super concerned. We were like, you really sure? Like, we don't mind coming in. Nah, we got it. The Saturday came around. They were like, listen, we made a mistake. You guys should have came in, because they evidently released like a press statement, which I don't know why you would do this, saying like, oh, we were under a cyber attack, but we were able to stop them. They didn't get anything, blah, blah, blah. Well, the ransomware actor had gotten in there, been in there, saw that press release, had a compromised email account, went and be like, oh, no, like, you're completely owned. Our ransomware didn't work, but we exfilled all this data. By the way, all of your management and C-level people, here's their like W-2s and the money they made, where they lived. This is only a portion of it. And they sent it to the whole distro list, the whole company. So like, kind of getting back to it. So sometimes like, the ransom could fail, maybe like the data you don't want out there. Now, obviously, if it's something that is legally protected, like if it's PI or something like that, you paying that's still a data breach. You still got to bring in a lawyer. You still got to pay for credit monitoring. But if it's something like a trade secret or something like that, a patent or something that's a little bit more questionable, especially when you get outside certain jurisdictions that maybe isn't nearly as protected, sometimes you kind of have to make that call. Like, if the ransomware failed and stuff like that, do I even want to pay? Like, or am I just going to cough that up? Is that really like some kind of proprietary knowledge or something like that? Is it worth it to keep that from entering out there for anyone to download?
Brandon wants to know if Bitlocker is efficient for personal equipment provided by Microsoft. So have you seen Bitlocker prevent anything, do anything? And if you don't want to speak specifically to Bitlocker because you don't want to like slander or endorse something, let me know.
Yeah. So like, I mean, I guess like I don't have clarity on what exactly they're asking for on this. I would say like Bitlocker as a control is designed to encrypt hardware. It does encrypt the hard drive and stuff like that, and that's more to kind of check that box of encryption at rest. That being said, like the data, the stuff, if you encrypt something with a BitLocker, it has to be unencrypted at some point in time. So if I were to physically steal like a laptop or computer, pull the drive out of there, yeah, that prevents me from doing anything on that drive, whatnot. Now, if it's BitLocker and it's powered on and stuff like that, the OS is, of course, like decrypting that stuff in real time. Like I can pull the files off, things like that. So like, is an effective control? Yes, for physical security, but it's not really going to stop malware. It's not going to stop like data theft other than that physical security aspect of data theft.
Yeah. And, I don't know about you, but like, and there's another question in chat that we're going to get to in a second, but like, Bitlocker, you set it and forget it, right? It's kind of an easy control unless you have CrowdStrike, and then it's a nightmare element of that situation they had. But I don't really see a lot of stolen hardware. You know what I mean? Like if you leave your laptop in an Uber and you work in healthcare, the only thing, it's great because now you can say definitively that in a risk assessment or in a breach, you didn't have a breach because you have these controls in place. But like if you don't work in healthcare, you work in a law firm or whatever, and you leave your laptop there, when someone gets it, like, I don't know, like what's the real likelihood they're going to pull the drive and pull you know what I mean? It's like they're going to hawk it at a pawn shop, or they're going to use it, or they're going to throw it in a dumpster,
Yeah, I would say like, it's a useful control for what it is. I'd say like actually in terms of digital forensic incident response, it's more of a headache and nuisance, because like if you are pulling the drive to do like dead disk imaging on it, the whole thing's encrypted unless you have like the BitLocker key. Now that gets into like how you're managing BitLocker keys, and there's a couple of different ways to do it, and some people do a horrible job at that. But like if the drive's encrypted and I pull the machine's powered off and I pull the drive to do forensics on it, it's encrypted, and I don't have a BitLocker key, there's no forensics I can do. Now, what's really interesting is, you talk to some ex-law enforcement people and stuff like that. If the machine's powered on, like logged in, you can do some stuff to try to pull that key out of memory. So you can do that, and you can do like some live forensic stuff around to get around that. That way it is usable. But yeah, like it kind of, I guess, depends on like I don't 100% know the intent of the question, but like, yeah, it's an effective control, but like it's not really in terms of like ransomware or malware prevention. Like it's not really designed to, stop against
take us around the campfire or the fireplace, Brandon, and share with us a couple stories. Might be some lessons learned from people who are doing different wrong, and can be improved. But share some stories with us.
Yeah. So like the first one I'd say is the one we were just talking about. Like, don't issue PR statements and stuff like that. I think the other lesson to learn from that is a lot of times just because like AV knocked something down or something failed, like it's not a big deal and there's no reason to investigate it. In fact, this is a pet peeve of mine, even like training like SOC people. Like I can't tell you how many SOC analysts be like, oh yeah, the security control blocked it. And it's like, but if I were to take what happened and what you can infer from that, where would it fall in the attack lifecycle? Like seeing AV stop Mimikatz, like really glad it did that. If they're deploying Mimikatz, it means someone's on the box trying to dump credentials. Don't you think we should investigate that to figure out what that C2 or that implant is to stop them from pivoting to a different tool?
Calls coming from inside.
Yeah. So I mean, that was a real interesting one. I did work many years ago in an actual ATP case against a large institution. Where they did what they call like a template injection. So, if you look at like Microsoft Word documents, you can have templates, right? And the templates are usually referred locally. So there's this vulnerability, which technically I think it's still vulnerability. You can do some things around it. But what you could do is you could actually say this Microsoft Word document references a template hosted on a share. This share is technically something on the internet. And it'd be like, a share somewhere out there, so an external share. So the way it works is my template's now going to be posted at like /8.8.8.8.8 my template.docx is what they put as the template in this. So when you open it up, it's going to try to pull that template down. That's essentially the attack. Now, what's interesting is whenever you do that, this is going to be an external server. And like, let's say it's out on the internet. Microsoft's just going to assume natively that, it's hosted on file share. It's going to go out and do SMB. And this is where people were like, Brandon, that's silly. We block SMB at the firewall. No big deal. What most people don't realize is Microsoft isn't dumb. If you try SMB multiple times and it gets blocked, it actually falls back to WebDAV, which is an old protocol. Developers used it back in the day for hosting like websites, putting up websites and stuff like that. It's over port 80. Port 8080, your typical like standard HTTP ports. It's an HTTP protocol, so that's usually not blocked. Whenever you do that, you go out and you try to do that. The malicious server institutes like a challenge. Be like, hey, trying to do this, you need to authenticate. Microsoft just natively says like, oh, sure, I'll go and send you my file hash. The malicious server just says, yep, totally checks out. You have access to it. It's a blank template. But what they're doing is they're listening for that hash. They're grabbing that hash. And a lot of times what they'll do is they'll steal like secrets for, AWS, Azure, something like that. Use that secret to grab these password hashes, to crack these password hashes, then get that cracked password, log back in through the VPN and get access to the environment. So in this case, it was an ATP. And the way that this came about was the FBI reached out to this organization and was like, listen, you've been a part of like this huge attack campaign, threat actor attack, doing this stuff. And that's all we can tell you because like everything else you need a clearance for. And it happened sometime over the last 6 months. So I was brought in there like, listen, something happened over the last 6 months. That's all the FBI can tell us. And I was like, well, that's not super helpful. And it was something involving email. That's the only thing they could tell us. Well, come find out, and after a little bit of teeth pulling and stuff like that, and talking to the threat actor was actually sending resumes and inserting resumes and applying for jobs with resumes. This resume, of course, was like a Word document with this template injection attack, and they were sending it to HR, but then they were also sending it through like the ERP, and they were also reaching out to the hiring managers and sending the resume directly there as like, someone who's super gung ho in hopes that they would click it, they'd get access to stuff, and they're trying to steal confidential data. So they were essentially trying to get in through HR, or really truly what they were really trying to do was get the hiring manager's credentials, tried to log in through the VPN to access data and steal it and exfil it that way. So that was a really interesting one, having to kind of lay that out and walk them through that, because they're like, we blocked SMB, so it's no big deal. So like actually going through, showing the logs, showing the web dev, like breaking all that stuff. And luckily they did have like full packet capture and whatnot. So it was relatively easy. The data was there to support it, but being able to tell that story, that's a great, all-time favorite one too. I've worked a couple different ATP ones. The ATP ones usually are a lot more of my favorite ones than your typical run, the real mill like ransomware ones though. Insider threats, I guess I can say this as well. Like, if you look at my LinkedIn, I work for a large electrical utility that made a decision to build a bunch of nuclear reactors that were worth more than the company itself. And when they failed to get a bailout because Toshiba and Westinghouse and stuff like that went bankrupt, they went bankrupt and eventually got bought out. But anyways, during that time, they decided that they were no longer going to build those two nuclear reactors and had to let people go. So that was very interesting, because like they had promised these people they'd let go, like, essentially like I guess you could say like a, sum of money, like a severance bonus,
Yeah.
if they didn't exfil data. But of course, a lot of these nuclear operators and stuff like that had data that they coveted, like training material and stuff like that. So watching a bunch of engineers and really smart people try to figure out how to exfil data and not get caught, that was very interesting as well.
Was that like whack-a-mole? Like,
It was whack-a-mole. I mean, like, it was all kind of crazy stuff. Like, there were people that took like Word documents and renamed them to like, chocolate chip cookie recipe, like things like that, just to say like, oh no, I downloaded a bunch of recipes in my like spare time. I'm just trying to get them out. It's like, I don't know of any like chocolate chip recipe that's a PDF that's like 300 megs. Like, seems a little obsessive. I mean, maybe it's a really intense chocolate chip cookie recipe. I don't know.
yeah.
But yeah, people doing that stuff, people that try to like zip stuff up or like encrypt stuff and zip it with like, oh yeah, that's not going to be obvious or questionable at all. Probably the most interesting thing was one guy like exfilled like right at like a terabyte of data. And I started pulling it, and none of it was company data. He was really into D&D and had went and downloaded all these D&D character guides and pretty much had his whole D&D campaign on his work computer. It was like, man, I got to get it out for all my guys, man. I've got Dungeon Master this weekend.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
But, it blew my mind. I was like, dude, a terabyte of D&D stuff. Like, he had like PDF versions of the guidebooks and stuff like that. It's like, damn, dude. Like,
Dude, you go down to his office and knock on his door. You're like, and he like turns around. He's like wearing a full like horned helmet and like a sickle or something.
I mean, like you ever watch Community? You remember like the
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you ever saw the Dungeon Dragons version of Community, but that's totally what I imagine. It's like a bunch of these nuclear guys in the nuclear reactor, like getting together and playing like D&D. Don't worry, guys, the reactor's melting down, but I'm about to level up my mage.
Yeah, I got D20 agility, so I'm gonna be able to get out of here, no problem.
Yeah.
Dude, so let me ask you this. This is like one of those like I guess myths I have, and I've heard both sides of it. When a business, like when you go in and deal with a business that's having their worst day and getting compromised and stuff, are they like, what level of cooperation are you getting from the business? Is it everything from whatever you need, Mr. Poole, all the way to like, we'll make time for you when we get time for you? Like, what's kind of the typical experience with dealing with a organization actively going through an attack from your perspective to execute work?
Yeah, so like, to be honest, it's completely and totally all over the place. The business as a whole usually like wants you there. There's a reason you were called in, or there was a reason they called the insurance company who called the breach coach who called you in because they need help, or they're concerned about like the liability aspect. Not even a lot of times, like this is what a lot of people don't understand. Like the big cost from incident response and digital forensic isn't actually like the recovery or physical damage. The biggest cost is actually on the liability side. Now we'll put that aside because that opens up a whole nother can of worms that we can talk about for like an hour, my friend.
Okay.
So we're going to put that aside for a minute. I'd say it really kind of depends. The business always wants you there. Now, as far as interacting with the technical teams, that's all over the place. Some people are glad you're there. Other people don't want you there because they're afraid that you're going to make them look bad or point the fingers at them, and they're not going to really cooperate. I can think of a couple times where they didn't really cooperate, or I walk in, the biggest part. So let's make this clear. The biggest thing during an incident response engagement is not to point fingers. No one's to blame. Mistakes are made. That's not the point. The point is to like understand what the risk is, understand what happened, and to like, try to smooth things out. No one's to blame. So that's an important thing to always like keep in mind. In fact, like in reports, I don't even put like usernames, people, so-and-so did this, like no names are even put in the report. Just keep all that stuff out. That being said, like some people, like I've walked in certain incident response engagements and people have quit, like critical people. In fact, there was actually one incident response engagement that I walked in, and within 2 minutes of being there, the CIO said something to his technical team, and they weren't a very, very big IT team, but the whole IT team quit.
Oh my God.
Just like quit and left. And the CIO was like, all right, we'll get to work. And I was like, dude, there's not an effing way I'm going to be able to do this. Like, you better get on the phone and apologize to these guys. Like,
Wow.
and it was one of those conversations. Like, I would say that's actually probably one of the more interesting things of incident response digital forensics is sometimes you're having to coach the client and how to communicate with their own employees in some ways. Like it's not the IT guy's like fault. And in some cases, like it's actual upper management's fault because they told the IT guy to do something unsafe and he said it was unsafe, but they needed it done by a timeline. But once again, like it's not really anyone's fault. So a lot of times, like, in this case, he had to go back with a little egg on his face, be like, listen, man, it's stressful. Like I could lose my job over this. I'm sorry. It's not really, any of y'all's fault. I'm just like stressed out. I got a lot on my plate. Like, let's reset. And like some of the guys like literally just like, no, I'm not coming back. But about half of them did come back. I was like the 6-man team.
Todd. Like
yeah. So I mean, like it's really all over the place. The business always wants you there. The technical guys, it can kind of vary, man. Sometimes they don't want you there because they're afraid of what you're going to find, you looking bad, casting blame on them. I mean, I think way back in the day, like before you started doing like the live streams, back when it was like the old school, like Simply Cyber videos, I did like a DFIR one. And that's one of the things I talked about. Like soft skills are by far the most valuable skill you can have in DFIR. Like the hard skills, the analysis, you can learn that stuff easy peasy. The soft skills are what make or break you.
I'm asking the mods if they can pull that video from you doing DFIR stuff. See if we can pull it up. I this whole week I've been doing a live class on how to like create content and do it well and find ideas and stuff. And I show the students a lot of video clips and sound bits of my early YouTube stuff. And let's just say the quality has improved a little bit over time. But yeah, that was definitely one of the earlier ones and a great one. That's the thing. Like Brandon's been a friend and or a colleague and a resource and an interviewer or interviewee for years and years and years. So I love it. One thing that we've talked about privately, Brandon, that it's come up and it's really interesting to me is the way that you get incident response work. I found it fascinating of how kind of complicated that that ecosystem is, frankly, because I feel like a lot of people are like, oh, I'm a business, I got hit, I'll call Barricade. Oh, I'm a business, I got hit, I'll call Panoptcy. And it's really not that simple. It's much more complicated. Can you share with the audience what it really looks like in the ecosystem?
Yeah. So, way back in the day, I don't know how many people remember this, but Capital One had a breach. And essentially they just had like this blob storage, like exposed the internet with a bunch of sensitive stuff in there. Someone found it, all this other stuff, no big deal. They got sued because there's PII out there, as is. And they went to court, and there was this interesting court ruling that came out that, Capital One for this investigation, like, had a retainer with Mandiant. Mandiant came in and ran the whole investigations. People sued Capital One, said, you didn't do enough for security and securing our data. You were negligent, blah, 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 blah. Capital One said, no. People said, yeah, you are, but we don't really know unless you release the forensic report. They said, well, the forensic report isn't something that has to be released. It's protected under discovery because we have this external law firm. And, the judge, which right or wrong, argued that no, that's not the case because you had a prior relationship with Mandiant before you brought in the breach coach. You had a contract directly there. Therefore, your whole incident response report is discoverable and you have to release it. And so they had to release the report. And that set a precedence where now, it used to be in the past, you can go out, you get a retainer with a company. Got an IR retainer. You found that company through doing other business, surfing the web, watching a video like this, saying I really like Barricade or really like Panoptcy. I'm going to do a retainer with them, whatever. Well, what happened was I said the most expensive part of cybersecurity earlier was the liability piece. And this is why. Because you don't necessarily want everything and where you have control gaps out there floating around publicly when you get sued, whether that's for you don't want to get sued and lose money, or you don't want a threat actor to actually understand where your gaps and holes are to exploit them. So this created this whole thing where now in order to do incident response and have that, report protected from discovery, you actually have to do I think they call it a Nelson agreement. It's like a tri-party master service agreement where you actually go and bring on a breach coach, which is just a fancy name for a data privacy lawyer. They have an agreement with a incident response firm that they're working with on your behalf. Therefore, it kind of falls under that attorney-client privilege and isn't discoverable and stuff like that. So that whole happened. So it used to be, you can go, you can find your, sign your retainer, do your stuff, reimburse your retainer against your insurance policy, all this stuff. Well, when that happened, insurance companies were like, no, not going to do that because we want to protect you and your liability. So you have to go through a breach coach to, essentially do an IR firm. The IR firm would have to have these relationships with these lawyers, and these lawyers more or less now run the whole engagement. So the way it works now is if you have an incident response and you have cyber insurance, want cyber insurance to pay for any of it, you call your cyber insurance provider. They will refer you to a breach coach. The breach coach will then go through and look at the whole list of preferred IR providers. A lot of times these breach coaches have 2 or 3 that they prefer to work with, because the way that the money actually works is the insurance company disperses and pays the law firm takes their cut, and then the law firm pays out the incident response firm from their cut. So law firms are incentivized to work with digital forensic incident response firms that are on the cheaper end, which means they often cut corners or they put junior guys there. That oftentimes means that, sometimes the whole infection isn't removed or steps are skipped and stuff like that. The other big thing that kind of with this whole ecosystem is lawyers, even though the report is protected, there's all this stuff about ways things can leak out, and them being lawyers, they don't like reports to be written or recommendations given for improving security, unfortunately. So that's also kind of bit people in the ass per se. Oops. Sorry, I forgot we were having to keep it PG here.
No, it's all good. It's all good.
Yeah, so a lot of times working with these insurance providers, they're you can't tell them all the issues they have and what to fix, because if you document that, then that might be discoverable in these weird wacky ways, and that creates liability for them. So you just shouldn't tell them about it. It's well, how does that prevent future incidents? In fact, there's a fantastic paper actually written in the Harvard Law Review talking about how sometimes law firms actually do more damage to companies because some of this stuff. And actually, I'm gonna have to see if I can find it. If I can find it, I'll share the link with you, Jerry. But it
Incident
was
response firms do more damage, or lawyers do more damage?
lawyers, the breach coaches actually do more damage being part of the incident response and directing the way they do incidents. They actually cause more issues. It was an article written up, I guess like 4 or 5 years ago now in the Harvard Law Review. They actually kind of talked about some of those effects, and it was really eye-opening, interesting.
I think this is it.
It might be it. I can't 100% remember.
This looks like this is actually from this year or a couple months ago, but it does look good. I'll see if I can pull it, but cyber risk score per cyber security incident.
No, that's not it. I'll see if I can find it here in just a minute. But yeah, the whole ecosystem is really interesting because, like I said, cyber insurance, as I said earlier, has really kind of changed the name of the game for providers. So the issue is now, like, people don't really do retainers anymore because the retainers, incident response retainers, open them up for liability. The only people you really see do retainers are people who are uneducated, because they just are unaware that it creates a lot of liability for them, and usually service providers who are unaware too. And that kind of brings up the question whether they should be doing incident response, or they're just kind of like negligent. They just kind of like, I'm not gonna really tell you. It also brings up issues because of that. Like, a lot of times your retainer hours can be used for other things like incident response tabletop, stuff like that. That has caused like a lot of people now not to do incident response for tabletops, because in the past they were just reusing retainer hours. I mean, it's created a lot of stuff. But then the more interesting thing actually is like cyber insurance and whether or not cyber insurance is a good thing. So if you think about like any other type of insurance, health insurance, auto insurance, home insurance, whatever, flood insurance, the act of insuring something has nothing to do with the underlying rate of the thing causing the risk. Like, having more people on auto insurance doesn't affect the rate of which people get in accidents. Cyber insurance, that's not true. They're not mutually exclusive. The more companies you have insured, the more people that are able to now pay a high ransomware demand. And so really and truly, like, cyber insurance, as it became more popular, has actually just skyrocketed like ransomware over the years. So you can actually draw a direct correlation between like the number of ransomware incidents and then the average ransom payment as a function of like cybersecurity, like cyber insurance.
I like it. The mod team, always working hard, has just confirmed the word ass is actually considered PG rated. So we can use it here on the channel. So there we go. You have free reign, Mr. Poole. So I do love it. What about, what about dealing with when you're in-house and dealing with incident response? Because I've never done like retainer work or been called in, but I've worked in places where we're dealing with something, and basically, even though we have some skills, counsel is like, nope, we're calling an external IR firm. Like, basically they're going to be handling it, and you're like, how often is the, what's the in-house experience like, or what have you seen?
So this comes back. This actually kind of falls into your favorite wheelhouse, Jerry, GRC and stuff like that.
And let all the squad members know that we earlier today at 3 p.m. did in fact include a GRC Mafia emote in chat. So go ahead and make yourself comfortable with that. Please, Brandon Poole, you have the floor.
Yeah. So a lot of times, like, it really varies from organization to organization, how they feel about the people's underlying skill set and really and truly what the underlying risk of the incident is. If it's incident response for something, let's say minor, like insider threat or something like that, or just HR thinks someone's not using employee resources wise and just kind of want to say like, hey, what have they done? Have they sent emails? Have they done this? Have they done that? Like I said, not something I really like to talk about, but that usually falls into like the scope here. SOC work, stuff like that. Like, you're not bringing an IR firm to investigate every like ransomware alert or anything like that. Larger organizations do have dedicated like DFIR people. They do have a little bit hands-on, but like they will bring in external firms whenever there's a high liability. They don't feel like the skill set is there necessary in house. They don't have like the time resources for those things. But like I said, a lot of times it comes down to liability. The team actually internal 100% could do to get the answer. Not a doubt a lot of times. But it's one of those things where, once again, even if you have like an in-house lawyer and an in-house team, that's not attorney-client privilege. So that's, once again, one of the reasons they bring in the external counsel and the external IR firm, is just to make it where if you're sued, it's not discoverable. So a lot of times they'll go that route just to do that. Other times, if they're sued, they don't want to say, oh, we had our internal team look at it. They want to say, well, we had this external organization entity come in, investigate this stuff, because it handles scrutiny a lot better in court. Really and truly.
It's very modular where you can excise it off. Yeah.
So, I mean, like I said, I mean, you can still do a lot of cool stuff as an internal DFIR team. But yeah, a lot of times if it's over certain business areas involving certain data, they need that kind of the head off that liability. They'll 100% bring that stuff in. And then, we talked about liability earlier. I think this is an important thing to kind of bring up, because it kind of falls right into the Capital One thing is, Capital One was brought in and was sued because they didn't have reasonable security, right? So there's a lot of states out there that now have written all these laws about reasonable security. You have to institute reasonable security. So here's the question I have for you, Jerry. What is reasonable security?
Yeah, exactly. Very subjective, very squishy, very qualitative risk assessment. Yes.
well, so we're actually in luck. So, a lot of times, and this kind of feeds onto the question you just asked when you bring in an external IR team. Is it reasonable to bring in an external IR team? So back in 2021, there's this nonprofit think tank of lawyers who came up as it's called the Sedona Conference. It's a nonprofit institute. I'm going to drop the link here. But they came up and they said, hey, what's reasonable security? Because there's all these people talking about reasonable security laws, dropping stuff, people getting sued saying you didn't have reasonable security during that. But let's define what reasonable security is. People were written laws about and never stated what reasonable is. So they actually kind of developed this huge thing. And I'm going to drop it here for you in private chat, Jerry. There's the white paper they came up with. It's 92 pages of what reasonable security is. They essentially kind of actually broke it down to a 5-part test. They look at controls, they look at foresight versus hindsight, the burden of information stewardness to others. So
looks like it's behind a simple, not paywall, but
you can get around it. Yeah, you can get around it. But anyways, if you really want it, it's free. The benefit to others and the effect of violating the statute or regulation. I'm about to make this a lot easier for you. So they wrote this 92-page paper, and out of that, some of the people came up and said, you know what, we can actually turn this more into a standard. So what they did was they created what's known as the DFIR standard, which stands for Duty of Care of Risk Analysis. And I'm going to drop the link for that here. And what they did is actually came up with a framework of how to evaluate risk and stuff like that. And if you're evaluating risk and making your risk decisions around these kind of decision points, essentially it checks that box for reasonable security. It's actually backed up by common law cases. So it's a actual fantastic resource.
Yeah, I'm pinning it right now. So if you're on YouTube, it's pinned to the top, so you can go ahead and pull it down. It looks like, hold on, what is this? This is just it? Just this?
Geez, Jerry, now you're gonna make me go back and look at it. So if you go over to the very top of navigation,
here it is. Standard. This is the actual link. Let me help you, community. Instead of just giving you a random link like Brandon did, I'm going to go ahead and give you the actual link that you want. Let's go ahead and help them out.
But yeah, so a lot of this stuff is actually defined in Pennsylvania. So there's the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus Orbitz Worldwide, Pennsylvania versus Earl Enterprise Holdings, a lot of this stuff. And they actually kind of define what, reasonable security was. So that was what these were the 3 big lawsuits. There's a bunch of other ones that they used to kind of define reasonable security, but you have this DFIR standard now. And it's kind of interesting. It's something that I try to incorporate in risk assessments and when I do incident response to kind of guide people. But it does talk about how you can kind of reduce that liability and whether or not what you're doing is reasonable. And if you are following that, it does hold up in court and kind of removes that liability aspect, like the civil or criminal aspect. Now, another thing to mention is the people who created the DACRA standard actually went ahead and created a risk assessment framework known as CIS RAM. So if you go to the Center for Internet Security, I think everyone's familiar with, like, the critical security controls and, like, the baselines, the hardening configs. But there's also something called CIS RAM, and that's actual, like, easy, like, risk assessment. They got a couple different, like, levels and implementations, stuff like that. But that's all based off DACRA. So if you just follow that companion workbook, use that, learn to do that, that checks that box for DACRA.
Yeah, and I have, for those who are interested, I have used this before. It's been a while. I forget it. I feel like it was like a simple, like, macro-laden workbook type thing, if I'm not mistaken. And it's got, like, a bunch of tabs pre-filled with stuff, and kind of gives you guidance on walkthrough. It's good. It's not awesome, but it's definitely good, and it's a good tool.
It's a quick and easy way to implement the DACRA stuff. Like I said, like, I've kind of incorporated the DACRA stuff into the quantified risk assessments that we do. Mm-hmm. At one point in time, it was like an add-on for the longest time. Now it's actually being, like, officially part of that. But like I said, it's an important thing that I try to keep in mind. And, you always have clients that ask for advice. So a lot of the clients I do still do incident response work for are folks that usually can't afford, like, the cyber insurance, or there's not a reason to bring in a lawyer, or they can't afford a lawyer for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So, like, not a lawyer, always tell them that they got to make their own decisions. But, like, I usually use that DACRA standard to kind of, like, help guide them in the right direction. Be like, based off this DACRA standard, the way that I interpret what's going on, this is kind of the recommendation I would give you, because it minimizes risk, or, has the greatest benefit from, like, the liability standpoint.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And the funny thing is, like, I've used it in the past, and I didn't know about this Docker thing. I think I downloaded it just as, like, a way to try a new risk assessment type tool and see what's going on. So it's even more valuable. And 8-Bit Oni is saying it's a great way to track compliance also.
Look at that. The Padawan has surpassed the master.
Right. And Iris Kitchen over on LinkedIn, the links don't transfer over. So you'll have to come to YouTube. But if you Google CIS RAM, that's kind of like at the end of the rainbow here of what Brandon's been talking about. CIS RAM, and you can download it for free and use the tool. CIS always hooking it up with config guides, and
I'm about to say, I'm just now starting to scroll through the chat. Either we had a very quiet, like, afternoon again, or I've missed a bunch of questions. Or
no, it was pretty quiet.
You've slacked off and not brought the questions to my attention, Gerald.
No, I did not do that. I did not. There were some questions I did answer them. There's one here from AJ. Brandon, do you think GRC is going to get automated in the next 3 to 5 years?
So, controversial opinion. I don't think anything. I keep hearing these people talking about, like, things are going to get automated and stuff like that. Listen, man, like, you can automate some aspects, but, like, you're not going to, like, automate someone completely out of a job in GRC. You're not going to completely automate someone out of a job in SOC or DFIR or anything like that. There's a lot of people out there that said that, a lot of thought leaders, but, like, there's no way. Like, I remember way back when Gartner published something back in the 90s talking about, like, the IPS will just completely end all security. Like, IPS is the silver bullet, the holy grail. Security won't exist anymore after you put in an intrusion protection system. What a joke. This kind of gets into, like, an interesting thing of, like, false positives, false negatives, context, stuff like that. Like, you can definitely automate stuff. You can use AI to do, like, cool things and stuff like that. But, like, AI is not going to replace, like, the human brain. It's not very good at context. It's not ever going to be really good at context. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, like, 50 to 100 years from now, but, like, I don't see in the short to medium term future of anyone having to worry about being automated out of a job necessarily. Anywhere in cybersecurity.
Well, and I feel like threat actors, pen testers, Tyler Ramsby's, they're pretty good at thinking creatively and kind of, like, breaking the box, right? Because the computer's thinking certain rules, certain standards, and when you subvert that, it doesn't know what to do, right? So it's definitely a good point. So we are at time. Brandon, I know you got a million things going on. That was a pretty fast hour, actually. What do you have coming up? Anything coming up people can get excited about? Maybe going to some conferences, speaking, teaching? What do you got?
I don't really have a whole lot going on. Like I said, it's been kind of quiet and whatnot. And there's not a whole lot of conferences, I don't feel like, at the beginning of the year. So don't really have a whole lot. I'll probably try to make it and attend the Simply CyberCon, whenever it happens later in the year, assuming I'm not banned or you don't.
You are not banned. No. Guys, can I just tell you really quickly, because Brandon would never say it. Brandon made a financial donation to support Simply CyberCon this year, which allowed us to do some great things. And I was like, dude, you want a booth? He's like, no need for a booth. No. I'm like, do you want like logos? He's like, nah. He's like, I just really like what you're doing and helping people. So let me help you help people. So this guy right here, not all heroes wear capes, Brandon Poole.
Well, I do want to say, I know that, Jerry has said multiple times that he's bad at business. And I'm not claiming I'm any better at business, but just to demonstrate how bad at business he is, I was like, dude, just tell me what you want as far as check. I cut it. And he's like, I don't know how much badges are going to cost. And this is going to cost, like, we'll just float it and I'll just send you an invoice. And I was like, dude, do you have a banking account? It's nonprofit, right? He's like, yeah, we got a bank account. I was like, just let me wire you money, and what's left over, just use it again for next year. Like, I'm trying to give you money, man. Why are you trying to cheap out?
Yeah. Well, hey, you try to maintain a level of integrity and not go too far to the too many times to the well. But yeah, no, I genuinely appreciate it. The whole community does. Many of them who are here right now in chat, we're at Simply CyberCon, and if you're coming this year, which will be like October, November timeframe, we're still trying to get sorted out on details. Brandon Poole will hopefully be there as well, and we will get to talk to him. We're gonna do a couple trainings too, Brandon. So I know you do. Brandon has a really great it's a how to execute tabletops, right? In a DR theme tabletops.
Oh, what are you referring to?
What's the one you did at SC Kick, right? Like you have a workshop.
Oh, you talk about the choose your own adventure ransomware where I was about to say, maybe I'm aging myself. I ended up buying my son a bunch of the choose your own adventure books, but yeah, I did like a whole like PowerPoint presentation that was a choose your own adventure tabletop thing that I used for like SC Kick for workshops. I did Ryan Trusky's over at SC Kick. I did like send him a text message. I haven't heard back from him yet, but I officially now have an AI powered tabletop, which is really interesting. With Gen AI, with Gen AI and stuff like that. That actually can like dynamically, and I'm actually looking at doing that for like paid tabletops where based off like input you give back, like it dynamically changes the injects and stuff like that. That's super intelligent. So took a lot of work to get working, but I'm actually kind of like excited about that. So maybe we can try to leverage that for something, but that's okay.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, we'll try to get Brandon Poole to run a workshop, a tabletop workshop. It's going to be a 2-day event with trainings the first day and talks the second day. So, all right, Brandon Poole, dude, this has been awesome. Way less spicy and Eye of Sauron on me in this particular episode, but maybe it's because I don't do digital forensics personally. But it's been really good, dude. Thank you so much for taking time to be with us today, to share your hot takes, for all you do for the Simply Cyber community. You are a member of the Simply Cyber community, obviously. So on behalf of chat and Team SC, Brandon, thank you for taking time and being with us today. I genuinely appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, man. Thank you for keeping me around all these years.
Dude, 100%. All right, everybody. Until next time, stay secure. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed that content. Keep the cybersecurity train going by connecting with the other Simply Cyber community resources. We have the Discord server that's lively and always keeps the conversation going. You can connect with me directly on LinkedIn. And also every single weekday morning on the Simply Cyber channel, we're doing live daily cyber threat briefings, 8 a.m. Eastern time, as well as Thursday at 4:30 p.m. We're doing live stream interviews with industry experts, and we produce videos that we push out every Wednesday morning. I'm Jerry from Simply Cyber. I hope you enjoyed